Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Stairway, Ramp, and Single-Step Accidents. During this program, the presenter will cover the basic components of a stairway system, such as risers, treads, stringers, handrails, newel posts, balusters, and lighting. Identify the building code related requirements with respect to the proper construction and placement of all of the above components. Provide examples of some poorly constructed and poorly maintained stairways. Review the ANSI and/or ASTM standards relative to safe walking surfaces, including single steps. And finally, provide examples of some poorly built ramps and single steps that go against codes and standards. The presenter for today's program is David Doddridge. David is a certified walkway auditor safety specialist. He has more than 50,000 hours of hands-on construction, building inspection, and construction experience. As an expert, David provides attorneys with expert consultation services in the following areas: personal injury, construction accidents, OSHA, construction defects and damages, building codes, and building inspections. He performs site inspections and writes expert reports and presents expert testimony. We will take 2 question and answer breaks during today's program. If you have a question, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer your question as quickly as we can. We encourage all attendees to submit questions throughout today's program. Tomorrow morning, I will send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this program. Contained in that email will also be a copy of the PowerPoint presentation used during today's program. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after today's program is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our distinguished guest, Mr. David Doddridge. David, the program is now all yours.
Well, thank you, Matt, and greetings to all. Thank you for coming today. We've got a good program here today. I want to just say that the slides that are early in the presentation are the result of my asking some of my attorney clients what they feel you folks should know when you get an accident. So I do have some advice in here from some very highly experienced personal injury attorneys. And later on in the presentation, I've sort of saved the best for last. I've got a lot of examples, photograph examples from cases that I've done in the past. So let's get started. Walkway Auditor Safety Specialist, which is one of the certifications that I have through the National Floor Safety Institute, is defined here as an individual who has completed a nationally recognized training program that offers knowledge, skills, and understanding through successful examination, testing, and demonstration in the methods, measurements, and analysis and recording of walkway slip resistance data. By measurement, we'll cover that a little later on. What we're talking about there is the measurement of the coefficient of friction on a walking surface, and I'll get into that. The goals and objectives of this course, again, what you should, as an attorney, first do when you get a case. We're going to review codes, methods of testing a stair tread for slip resistance, some definitions of coefficients of friction, commonly found defects in stairways and ramps, and some other issues as well. So what should you as an attorney do when you first get a slip and fall case? Go to the scene immediately. Take pictures from all angles in an attempt to preserve the scene. The more the merrier. You can't take too many pictures. There could be something in there that that your expert that you may hire in the future would pick up on that you may or may not feel was important. Sit and watch the scene for 20 minutes or so. Sometimes, and again, this is advice from other highly experienced personal injury attorneys. Watch the scene. Just stand there and observe, and sometimes you can often find liability just by observation. Weather conditions may or may not affect the scene. You want to find out what the weather conditions were on the day of your client's accident. It might be an outside stairway. It might be a stairway leading down into a subway, which I actually have some photographs of. And those are all subject to wet conditions. And of course, ask the client if there were any witnesses. Try to get immediate statements from them. Check the status of the owner of the building. If it's a commercial building, find out who the owner or the lessee is. If the owner is a corporation, find out who the shareholders are. Find out if the lease is recorded. Find out if the lessee is responsible for maintenance and repairs. Go to City Hall, find out if the business is registered and to whom. Emergency room. I thought this was interesting. This came from a colleague of mine. Obtain emergency room records and read them before hiring an expert. Why? Because doctors often use templates in their reporting that could simply just state fell at home, when in fact the plaintiff maybe fell at a supermarket or a commercial location. So that could be a mistake. And then you would be forced to get a note from the doctor stating where the plaintiff actually stated that they fell. So that can be time consuming and frustrating. So, and become educated as an expert. Become your own expert. You need to know if you have a case before you hire an expert. By observing the scene, interviewing witnesses, employees, performing research at City Hall, you may be able to tell whether you have a case or not. And if in fact you do, then you want to go hire an expert. Experts are expensive, so you want to hire one only if you know that if you're reasonably confident that you have a case. Check local codes and zoning ordinances, perhaps workplace regulations. If it's an employee that got hurt, state industrial codes as well as OSHA codes. Some towns require a certificate of fitness or something similar before being allowed to rent. Find out which codes apply to the subject building. That's a little tricky sometimes, and I'll get into that a little later on. It can be a little complicated. If it's a workplace accident, find out if there's a written safety plan, like on a construction site, for example, safety meetings, accident reports, and that kind of thing. State industrial codes, for example, in Massachusetts, we have, which is where I live and do a lot of work. We have the CMR, Code of Massachusetts Regulations, and there is an industrial code within that. Oftentimes, industrial codes will mirror OSHA regulations, but there could be some variations. So you want to check that as well. What are the key market segments most affected by slips, trips, and falls? Are these listed here statistically? I don't need to read those off to you. You can read them yourself. You will get a copy of this webinar emailed to you as well. So, causes of stairway accidents, trips, and falls: physiological factors, of course, balance, hearing, vision. One client of mine who gave me some advice for the purposes of this presentation said that once he went out to a scene and observed a lot of older people walking up and down this stairway. Come to find out there were 4 nursing homes or 4 complexes in the immediate area that were geared toward an older population. So there were much older people walking around that area. Social factors, of course: age, health, medication, preoccupation like texting, which can certainly preoccupy somebody. Environmental issues such as flooring, lighting, and hazards. Hazards meaning things that are in the way that could be moved. Contaminants on stair tread surface, such as liquids. Maybe somebody spilled some coffee, some water that could cause the stair tread or landing to become more slippery. Okay, so now here we get into the basics of a stairway, basic components of a stairway. The tread, also known as the step, which is the surface that is actually stepped upon. The rise, which is the vertical distance from one tread to the next. The nosing, which is the horizontal leading edge of the tread that sticks out beyond the vertical riser. And there are codes with regards to that, which we'll get into in some of the pictures and diagrams that I have here. Dimensional uniformity is important. Codes require that the riser height and the tread or step depth not vary by more than 3/8 of an inch from one to the next. For human factors purposes, I've got some good examples of that as well. If you're walking down a stairway and each riser height is the same from one to the next, and then you get to the last one and it's an inch shorter, then all of a sudden your foot finds ground much quicker, and that can cause some problems for certain people. Structural integrity of the stairway, of course, they're supposed to be maintained, well maintained. Stringers, I don't know if you've heard this term before. The stringer is the structural component of a stairway that the risers and treads are actually fastened to. So that is a structural component of the stairway. Handrails, of course, we all know what handrails are. They are to be placed at a specific height above the leading edge of the stair tread. By leading edge, what I'm talking about is the front edge of the step. Pardon me. Handrails are to be no greater than 2 inches, 2¼ inches in width for gripping purposes. Single handrail is required in 1- and 2-family structures. Handrail on each side is required in commercial buildings. The guardrail. Guardrail can also act as a handrail. However, if you observe a stairway, the handrail comes up and there's a landing or another level, and the railing is there, that would be considered a guardrail. And they are required to be a minimum of 36 inches in height and designed to withstand 200 pounds of lateral force, which is a considerable amount of force. I know somebody whose daughter lost her balance as she was ascending the stairway recently. Her body went up against the railing, and the railing gave way, and she fell and she broke her ankle. So that is certainly a code violation. Lighting, of course, is critical. Minimum lighting for a stairway at the tread level is 1 foot candle. Foot candle is a unit of measure used to measure the strength of lighting. Landings, of course, at the top or in between flights of stairs. There are lots of different types of stairs that we see: straight run stairs, spiral stairs, metal pan stairs, scissor stairs, alternating tread stairs, winders, etc. And I have some visual examples of all of that. This is a straight run stairway. This is a close-up view of the relationship between the riser and the tread and the nosing. This is the riser height right here. I'm sorry, let me get my pointing. Here we go. This is the riser height right in here. This is the tread depth or width right in here. And this piece here is known as the stringer. That is a structural piece upon which the treads and risers are attached. This is the headroom of 6 feet 8 inches, 80 inches, and that is to be measured from the leading edge of the treads right here up to this point right here. So that is a straight run stair. Typical spiral stair. Spiral stairs have certain limitations and certain codes. For example, as we will discuss later on in the presentation, if you measure out in this direction 12 inches at a 90-degree angle to the rise of the next step, not to exceed a certain number of inches. So, and the overall width of the spiral stairway is also going to be discussed. This is a typical metal pan stairway on obviously a commercial location. The next slide will illustrate what a metal pan stairway is, what we mean by that. This is actually, it's a well-built stairway. However, I do see a code violation here, right up in here. This landing, according to commercial codes, is supposed to be flush with the door sill up in here. There's not supposed to be an immediate step down at the sill of the door. Why they constructed it this way, I'm not sure. I did not construct this stairway. Here's a metal pan stairway under construction, and this is to illustrate what we mean by a metal pan stairway. Here's the stringer right here. Here are the steps or the treads. These get filled in, so they're in the shape of a pan. So they get filled in with concrete. Metal pan stairways, as per OSHA guidelines, are not allowed to be used until such time by the workers, other than those assembling it, of course, until such time as these pans are filled in with concrete or a temporary wood. They may not want to pour the concrete during a certain phase of construction because it's messy and takes time to dry and set up and so on and so forth. So this is what we mean by a metal pan stairway, which are typically found in commercial buildings, commercial construction. This is a scissor stair because of the way that it's shaped, like a scissor. So you go up, there's a landing here, of course, and then you go up again. That's an example of a scissor stair. This is an alternating tread stairway, which has very limited allowed uses under the building code, and for obvious reasons. They're not safe. They're a space saver. I thought this was a good example because this is a typical standard stairway here, and this is a alternating tread stairway, and you can see the amount of space that it saves. So I thought this was a good example. So alternating tread means one tread's here, the other's here, 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 and there are very specific code regulations that deal with alternating tread stairways as well. And here's your typical winder, as you've seen, I'm sure, on mostly on residential construction. And there are codes with regards to winders as well, which we'll get into. When you measure 12 inches out in this direction, and then at a 90-degree angle to that leading edge, it is not to be less than a certain number of inches. Okay, the IBC 2006 Building Code, which is the International Code Council, authors building codes that are known as model codes. They are adopted by states and municipalities as codes, as their own building codes, sometimes with certain amendments, like you'll find that Rhode Island has adopted, for example, the IBC 2006 with Rhode Island amendments. And usually those amendments deal with areas that are in a certain location that are subjected perhaps to more of a wind load, for example. Usually they're not going to be Rhode Island amendments that affect a basic building component such as a stairway. It's going to be more specialized than that. So spiral stairways are permitted in residential dwelling units and commercial buildings that serve an area of not more than 250 square feet, which is a small area, like maybe a mezzanine of some sort. The treads of a spiral stairway are to measure a minimum of 7.5 inches deep when measured at a right angle to the leading edge of the tread, 12 inches from the narrow side. So if we go back to, hang on a second, please. Maybe a slide. So when you measure 12 inches out from this edge at a right angle, it is not to be less than 7.5 inches in this direction. Okay. So that's an example of what is in the IBC 2006 relative to codes related to spiral stairways. Pan stairways, as I mentioned earlier, OSHA Part 1926 regulates construction safety, does not allow the use of a pan stairway by workers until the pans are filled in. I had a case in Connecticut where it was this exact scenario. The pan stairway was built, the railing had not been installed on it yet, the pans had not been filled, and an older man, a plumber who was working on site, decided to use that stairway even though it was sort of blocked off, and his foot caught on the edge of the pan, and he fell 12 feet over the side, and there's no railing installed yet. So, and he really got hurt. Alternating tread stairs are very limited to their use. They can be used in factory, high hazard, and storage buildings, serving an area that is not more than 250 square feet, which again is a pretty small area. Alternating tread stairways are also allowed in institutional buildings, such as prisons, that serve maybe a guard tower, observation room, control room, again, not more than 250 square feet. Winders. Winder treads are required to have a minimum tread depth of 11 inches, unlike a spiral stairway, which is 7.5. And again, you measure from the narrow side 12 inches out along the leading edge. At a right angle, you measure 11 inches in. Not to be less than 11 inches. Okay, so now we're going to get into the coefficient of friction. What is the coefficient of friction? It defines the slip resistance of a walking surface. In engineering terms, the force required to move two sliding surfaces over each other, divided by the force holding them together. And I'll simplify that in a moment. Static coefficient of friction refers to objects that are stationary, like your coffee cup sitting on your desk. Dynamic coefficient of friction refers to objects that are in motion, like a toboggan sledding down a hill. To put it in simpler terms for the purposes of this presentation, coefficient is a multiplier, a constant that is used. So if an object weighs 100 pounds and the static coefficient of friction is 0.50, then you multiply 100 pounds times 0.5, and you come up with 50 pounds of lateral force, sideways force, placed against the object to cause it to move or break free of its static friction. Building codes and ADA codes recommend coefficient of friction that is 0.5 or greater. They're not always enforced. Actually, ADA is 0.6, and for ramps, ADA recommends 0.8. The lower the number, the more slippery is the surface. This is a tribometer. This is a device that is used to measure the coefficient of friction. This is the one that I use. It is a reliable, recognized method of taking the measurement. What you do is there are 3 feet on the bottom that screw in that have neolite pads on them. Neolite is the typical shoe material. And what you do is you hook it comes with a line and a ring that you hook onto this device, this little end here, and you hold your hand out in this direction, place it upon the floor, and use your index finger to pull that line gently but steadily until the tribometer moves. And when it moves, that means it has broken free of its static friction, and it will record that measurement right up in here. So that is a tribometer. This is my tribometer that I used to measure the coefficient of friction on the stairway in a subway station. And interestingly enough, the attorney, very, very experienced firm in personal injury, wanted me to measure this set of stairs and another set of stairs that he felt would be safer. And in fact, he was right. The coefficient of friction on the other set of stairs was considerably higher than the coefficient of friction on this particular stairway. They're both at subway stations in the same city. So I think what he was trying to do is to present his case as if to say, hey, look, this subway station stairway is safer than the one that my client was injured in. So I thought that was interesting. And I measured this in left to right, right to left, front to back, and back to front, 4 different directions. The wet tests are used with distilled water because that is what the standard says. The standard meaning ANSI, NFSI, B101, which I believe we'll talk about later, calls for wet testing to be done with distilled water. You can't, well, you could test with, like, let's say your client slips on some spilled coffee. There is no standard written that has guidelines for testing with coffee. So you test with distilled water because that's what the standard says. You could also test perhaps with coffee just to gather that data, but you want it to hold up. You want to make sure that you have a calibrated device, that the device was prepped on the scene properly as per the manufacturer's instructions, and that you follow the standard for wet and dry testing.
David, excuse me, before we get into the codes and standards, would you mind taking a couple questions from members of the audience? We have a question here from Joel who asks, can you indicate when handrails are required for home and commercial stairways?
Yes. When on a residential structure, a handrail is required. Oh gosh, I might have to confirm this and email you the answer. For a stairway that contains, I believe, 3 or more rises. On commercial, it's going to depend on the occupant load and the usage of the building. I do a lot of single-step accidents. You never see handrails on single steps. So I'm going to say on commercial, it's going to be 2 or 3 steps or more is going to require a handrail.
Okay, great.
David, I can look that up and email that to you, Matt. And you
okay, yeah. Once I get that, I will forward it on to all the attendees. David, how do you make sure that when you get to a scene like the subway stairs, that the scene closer resembles the scene of the accident?
Well, that's a question that was asked during last week's presentation as well. And the answer is you really can't. I mean, you have to get there as soon as possible. If the on a heavily trafficked stairway like those found in a subway station, chances are pretty high that when you go there, it's going to be representative of the same conditions that the client was subjected to. That's one of the reasons I think why you want to make note of the weather on the day of your client's accident, the time of day, if it's an outside stairway, which would provide more or less natural light. So if that were the case, if the accident happened on a sunny day, then you want to inspect the stairway under similar circumstances, but that's about all you can really do. Some of these cases that I get are a couple of years old. But I think that's one of the reasons why the attorney clients that I had consulted for the purpose of this presentation suggested go to the scene immediately, interview witnesses immediately, so you can try to preserve the scene. That's about it.
Okay, great. We have two more questions, and then we'll get back to the codes and standards portion of the presentation. Joseph asks, is the 0.5 coefficient of friction for wet or dry stairs, or both?
It depends on the area that you're testing or auditing the floor in. 0.5 is 0.5 or greater is always the goal. In certain situations, certain other situations, 0.6 is going to be the goal. For example, in a 0.6 in a wet area like the side of a pool deck, it's always wet. If it's wet and it measures 0.6, then or greater, then you're in pretty good shape. And then, of course, ADA recommends 0.8 on a ramp. So 0.5 to 0.6 or greater would be considered, either wet or dry, would be considered good.
Okay, and we have one last question, and then we'll get to back to the presentation of content. Stuart asks, what about the requirements for outside railings and a commercial, parentheses, commercials, such as in a park? Are there different regulations for settings such as a public park?
A public park is not really necessarily subjected to building codes. Building codes are for the purposes of planning and designing, a building. A park is not a building. So that being the case, there would be other standards or codes that could apply. Typically, commercial buildings with a certain occupant load of, say, 50 or more for interior stairways or stairways that lead directly up to the building are going to require handrails on both sides of the stairs. We're going to get into that, actually, with some drawings that I have on here. But a park, an outside park, wouldn't necessarily be subjected to compliance with a building code. There could be other codes or standards that would be more specific to the municipality that the park is located in.
Okay, great. Why don't we continue on with the presentation of content?
Okay, thanks, Matt. Various local and state and federal governments require stairs and ramps to meet certain requirements. Pardon me. According to the following codes and standards, this is not a complete list, of course. International Code Council is the most popularly adopted model building code. The ADA, OSHA, and ASTM has a standard that they've written that deals with safe walking surfaces. Building codes are typically grandfathered in. So when you determine what code applies to a particular building, it's important to find out when the building was originally built and which code was in place at the time. In New York, for example, an old theater. It was built as a theater. It still is a theater, and the codes, as long as it's always been a theater, the codes in place at the time of the theater's construction are the codes that apply to the building today. When you have a change of use in a building or a space within a commercial building, that triggers code compliance. For example, if the building is converted from mercantile to assembly, and those are both uses that are within the building code, such as a retail store being converted to a restaurant, then the restaurant would have to comply with codes relative to assembly usage rather than mercantile usage. So that triggers code compliance. The International Code Council, formerly known in part as BOCA, the agency that offers model codes that are adopted. Many states are adopting ICC codes. So codes from one state to the next are really becoming quite universalized and standardized. Within those codes, these building codes, they use reference standards within the code. And some of those standards are developed, for example, by ANSI, by ASTM. ASSE is a popular one, American Society of Safety Engineers. These are all private nonprofit organizations that write these standards, and those standards are listed in building codes as a reference standard, usually in an appendix. And within the writing of codes, it will say that a door is to meet NFPA such and such standard for fire protection and that kind of thing. So that's how codes work. Some examples of stairway and ramp requirements found in the IBC. Ramps are to have a slope of no more than 1 inch vertically for each 12 inches horizontal. So if you measure horizontally 12 inches, it cannot rise more than 1 inch. That's for a ramp. Stairways, maximum rise of 7 and minimum of 4 for commercial buildings. Minimum of 4 because if it's less than that, it really just causes a trip step, and I've got an example of that. 7 3/4 maximum for residential. Minimum tread depth in commercial, 11 inches, minimum of 10 for residential, and the headroom is 80 inches minimum. Minimum width of 44 inches unless the occupant load is less than 50, in which case the minimum width can be 36. We discussed dimensional uniformity earlier, that the variation in tread depth and riser height shall not exceed 3/8 of an inch throughout the entire stairway, and the treads are to be level to within 2% of the slope. Handrails are required on each side in commercial buildings, and are to be placed no less than 34, no greater than 38 inches above the leading edge of the treads, which I showed you earlier on that stairway diagram that I pulled up. The strength of the handrail and guardrails, 200 pounds, concentrated load of 200 pounds. Also codes with regards to the graspability of a handrail, so we'll discuss that in the following slide. Some codes for stairways in historic buildings are grandfathered in. I was in a commercial building recently, and it was an old house that was being used as a law office, and the stairway clearly was not in compliance. It was an original stairway. It would have disturbed the historical integrity of the inside of the building, and would have caused, if they were to reconstruct it, considerable amount of work. So sometimes they're grandfathered in. There are other codes, state and local housing codes, International Property Maintenance Code, which is authored by the ICC, that deal with proper maintenance of stairways in commercial and certain residential, like rented buildings. Let me start going a little faster here. This is only on slide 33. This is a landing. The landing has to be the same depth as is the stairway wide. So if the stairway is 36 inches, then the landing has to be 36 or more. And the doors cannot interrupt the landing by more than half the width of the landing, like in this photograph here. And again, this is basically the same thing, showing the width, half the width of the landing here, and the door just making it. So that's an example of doors related to landing and width and so on and so forth. Here's the graspability of a handrail, and I'll show you some slides later on. If it's round, then the diameter can't be more than 2 inches in diameter. If it's not round, then the perimeter measured around the entire perimeter cannot be less than 4 inches and no greater than 6 1/4 inches, with a maximum cross-section width of 2 1/4 inches. The handrail also has to have some clearance right in here between the wall and the handrail, and that's all for the purposes of being able to grasp it. Handrails are to be within 30 inches of walking down a stairway. You have to have a handrail that's within 30 inches of you. Okay, so that is relative to how many handrails are necessary based upon the width of the stairway and the occupant load. Accessibility codes for persons with disabilities. The ADA /AG. AG means accessibility guidelines. Again, ramps no steeper than 1 in 12, and the coefficient of friction on ramps 0.8 or greater. Aside from the ADA, state and local governments also have their own regulations regarding accessibility. So you really have to be in compliance with all those. OSHA. For construction stairway, like a temporary stairway on a construction site, it's 30 inches high or greater. It has to have at least one handrail. They have to be built to be within 30 to 50 degree angle from horizontal, and the variation, the dimensional uniformity within the stairway has to be no greater than 1 1/4 of an inch, as opposed to building codes, which is 3/8 of an inch. So that's close, but not exactly the same. Other codes and standards related to stairways and ramps that are out there. ANSI writes them. ASSE writes them. The UFAS, which is the federal standard, Fair Housing Act, HUD, and ASTM all have codes and standards that are relative to stairways and ramps. This one is ASTM standard practice for safe walking surfaces. I use this one on a pretty regular basis because it covers a lot. It's known as standard F1637. The scope is to cover design, construction guidelines, minimum maintenance criteria for new and existing buildings. And it addresses all these different things. So here we're going to get into some pictures, and I've been kind of going quickly through these last slides because I want to spend some time on these photographs because they say a lot. This is a residential stairway case that I had. There's a lot of things wrong with this stairway. There's no guardrail on the right-hand side. This is a handrail that is too wide. It's a 2x4, which is 3.5 inches in width. And one thing that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but I certainly do in this photograph, is that the riser height here on the bottom stairway is considerably less than the riser height on the rest of the stairway. Here, here, here. So the woman was walking down with dimensional uniformity until she got to the last step, and all of a sudden her foot hits the ground 1.5 inches closer than what the rest of the stairway provided, and with ice buildup, she slipped. She wasn't ready for it. This is a closer view. You can see very clearly here that there's a considerable distance from this height here to this height here. This is an industrial stair. Everything is wrong with this stairway. It was poorly built and poorly maintained. It was an area where there was forklifts that would bang into it. Really shouldn't have even been made out of wood. It should have been made out of steel, but that would cost a lot more money. So this is a stair stringer that's broken, obviously structural integrity. This post here, which supports the handrail, is very wobbly as a result, and probably did not withstand more than 200 pounds as required with lateral force. This is the way it was fastened at the top of the stairway. It's pulling away. It's just a poorly built, poorly designed stairway. Dimensional inconsistency. This step is considerably higher than the remaining stairway, and also this landing really should be flush with this door sill. There should not be a step immediately at the door. So that's another violation there. Earlier I mentioned nosing. Nosing is the distance that the stair tread, for example, right here, projects beyond the vertical rise, which will be right in here. And that is to allow some toe space, so that it's not just a straight up and over 90-degree angle. Obviously, this is some sort of patch. Lots of things wrong with this stairway. This railing looks fine, but it's not. It's this newel post right here was very, very, very wobbly. It was poorly built. This is in a rented condominium in New City, New York. So the woman was coming down the hallway, went to take a left down the stairway, grabbed the newel post, and this thing just flopped back and forth. It was very, very poorly built, poorly maintained, and she fell down the entire flight of stairs. Also, this handrail should go all the way up. This handrail, again, this is a handrail that goes down, required only on one side, but it's supposed to go the entire way up. So they should have continued this and completed it at the top of the stairway. This is an example of a step immediately at a door. This is a trip step at an ATM kiosk in Massachusetts. You wouldn't think much of this. However, you can see this shelf just inside the door. What happened was, and this is an obstruction within the path of travel, so this shelf shouldn't be there. The woman opened the door, which opens out. The door closing speed of the door was considerable. It closed pretty quickly behind her, causing her to trip on that step that's at the door sill and fall, and actually fractured her larynx right on this corner right here. So she really got hurt. And it still exists in this exact same condition today. They haven't fixed it. This is a ramp at a restaurant in Rhode Island. this ramp is in compliance. It's in good condition, and it meets the slope requirements and whatnot. But this side ramp is much steeper, and is steeper than code would allow. When you combine that with ice and snow buildup, my client came out of the restaurant, went in this direction toward his car, flipped, and fell up against a car, and lay there for quite a while before anybody even really noticed. He couldn't even move. So it might look like it's in good condition, but it may not. So that's why you really want to preserve the scene, get witness statements, and take as many pictures, gather as much data as you possibly can. Go there, hopefully under the same conditions. If he was there at night, you want to go there at night and see if the lighting was okay, if there's a bulb that was burnt out, not replaced, that kind of thing. This is a ramp in New York City. This edge was about 1.5 inches high. They could have constructed this ramp so that it was flush with the sidewalk, but they didn't. Pedestrian came in this direction, went to walk up the ramp, caught his foot on this leading edge here, and fell. So things that look good may not necessarily be good. You have to keep that in mind as well. I wish I had a better shot of the stairway. This is a case that I have in Rhode Island. I did not take this photograph. The attorney took a bunch of photographs, and this is the best one. This is interesting because you look at this and you'd think that it's in good condition, and it is. It's in a good state of repair. However, the material on the stair treads here, on the landing, on the floor inside are all exactly the same. Even the grout lines. See the grout lines right here? They all line up with each other. So I would imagine, and this was recently retiled. So I would imagine that the tile guy probably stood back and said, "Geez, look how well those grout lines line up." And I'm sure that was intentional. However, when you come in the direction of descent on a stairway like this, I've seen a lot of them. You can't tell that there's a variation in elevation here. You're coming from this direction. This floor blends in with this floor. If you're older, you can't tell that there's a drop-off right there. The ASTM guide for F1637 that I discussed earlier calls for a visual cue, which is a contrasting stripe right along here, right along that leading edge, to warn users that there is a step there. Modern building codes, and this may or may not have to comply with modern building codes. I haven't gotten that far in the case yet, but this landing really should be flush with this floor surface. There's no variation in elevation from the floor surface to the landing. And there's something else in this stairway that you may be looking at it and not really notice. It's the fact that this door opens up against the handrail. It obstructs the handrail. So the handrail is really not doing anything until you get to this first step. So if you fall here, you don't have any handrail to grab onto because the door is in the way. So that's just a simple design consideration. This guy really got hurt. This is in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Of course, everything is wrong with this stairway. It's on the back of a commercial location. There's no landing at all. The lighting was poor. It's far too steep. The handrail is far too wide, and this guy came out and really just fell and really got hurt. This is interesting. You'd look at this and you wouldn't think much of it. But this is a walkway leading to it. There's a door right here. This is a residential apartment complex geared toward older people. The woman just got out of knee replacement surgery that they performed the day before. So this is the day after, and she was being helped by her relatives into the building, and she caught her foot on this step right here, which again, this outside surface should be flush with the inside surface. She caught her foot, her knee went bending back in the opposite direction that it's supposed to bend, and they ended up having to amputate her leg, poor thing. So, again, it might look okay, but it may very well not be. This is a good example of that minimum 4-inch requirement. This is only a few inches. This door was jockeyed open. It was a summer day. This material here is exactly the same as this material here, so they blend together. And a man was entering the building with the door already, in an open position, just walking along, and tripped and fell into the building. Another similar situation here. All they had to do really was build a platform and place it on top of this deck, a 44-inch square platform, place it right up on top of this deck so that it was flush. You'd walk along the deck, have one step up onto the platform, and then walk into the building. Got about 8 more slides to go, so the timing looks pretty good. This is a curb ramp, which you see as curb cuts. There really is no visual cue here. Visual cue is very, very easy to provide as the owner or lessee or manager of a commercial space, commercial building. The woman was walking along here. These materials are all very much the same, and she tripped on this step and smashed her head against one of these planters. This here is a different location. I took this picture because I thought it was an excellent example of providing a visual cue. It is quite obvious that there is a step here. So they did a good job on that. This is a brick walkway at a commercial location in New York, where a disabled vet was walking with a cane and put the cane down into this depression. I got stuck, and he fell and broke his hip. So this is really sort of a poor choice of materials. It may look nice with the cobblestone edging separating the paved parking area from the brick walkway, and that's all well and good. However, this is an ADA violation right here. And what I did to measure that was I took a scribing tool that is used in carpentry, and I used that to record the depth of this depression to see if it was greater than what ADA codes call for. And in fact, it was. About 3 or 4 more slides here. This is an outside stairway at a golf course. Now, first looking at the stairway, what do you first see that could be wrong with it? First thing I see, of course, is the fact that, again, this landing is not flush with this door sill. So there's an immediate step at the door. Now, this stairway may have been built in the 1950s. The code that applied to this stairway or this building at the time of its construction may not have called for anything. And if it's always been a golf course and the building has never changed in use, then that code would still apply. However, this canopy right here was fairly recently constructed. They should have pulled a building permit for this. They may or they may not have. So what do you see here? You see that again, there's an immediate step at the door. These treads were considerably out of level too, I believe. And there's really no visual cue. It's all made out of the same materials and whatnot. But and this is why an expert is important in a case like this or any other case, is that if they had gotten a building permit for this canopy, then that would prompt the canopy or the stairway or the canopy to be installed upon the stairway to comply with code. How does this canopy construction not comply with code? Well, it's because, let's take a very good shot. These are the posts that support the canopy, and they are placed directly up against the handrail in 4 locations. Here, 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 and here. Now this handrail is supposed to be unobstructed, but it is now obstructed by the structural components of this canopy. So when you walk out the door, if you went to grab this handrail, this post would be in the way. So code compliance can be argued here. They were supposed to get a permit for this canopy. If in fact they did, then the building inspector or somebody missed this as a code violation. Really what they should have done was install these posts on the other side of the railing, spaced far enough away from the railing to provide the proper grasping space, and thus causing this handrail to be unobstructed, which is supposed to be. So I thought that was a good example. And you'd be surprised what's missed by building inspectors, by lots of people with regards to code compliance. That's my last slide, Matt.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, David. We have a couple questions here that I'd like to get to before we wrap up today's presentation. First, going back to all of the images that you just showed, how would you advise building owners or attorneys who are representing those building owners to mitigate against the risk that you pointed out, or the potential dangers that you pointed out in these images?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Could you repeat that one more time?
How would you advise building owners to mitigate their risk, to remove these dangers or potential dangers from the properties?
Well, they could hire somebody who is a building code expert, such as myself. A lot of engineers deal with building codes, commercial architects. I also operate a commercial building inspection service that we do property condition assessments, part of which is code compliance if the client wants that. So you really, I guess what you'd want to do is hire somebody who can look at the subject's property. The safety engineer, the American Society of Safety Engineers, probably has a list of members, and their job is to analyze components and areas of a building for safety compliance. So that would be one way, certainly.
Okay, excellent. We have a question here from Charles who asks, can you go over stairs that are covered by carpet, and does that make matters worse, especially if handrails are not present?
Stairs that are covered by carpet, that's an interesting question, actually. The organization that I belong to, the NFSI, National Floor Safety Institute, has a wall of shame in the office, and there are photographs of all sorts of different hazards. And one of them is a big carpeted stairway in what looks to be like a casino, like a substantial commercial building. And the stairway is carpeted with the exact same carpeting as the floor. So it all blends together. So in the direction of descent, if the carpeting is the same, then there's really no visual cue that where the stairway starts. So the solution is really quite simple. They could use a different carpeting on the stairway. They could run it in an opposing pattern to be able to identify that there is a stair there. On that tiled stairway that I showed you earlier, they could have simply chosen a different pattern for that landing and run the tile, say, diagonally. There are simple solutions to mitigating these hazards. Carpeting, if it's the same as the floor and the patterns match up, then it could pose a hazard. With regards to handrails, it depends on how many steps there are. My recommendation for any commercial building, even if there's only one or two steps or more, is to put a handrail there. A handrail also aids as a visual cue. If you see a handrail, then chances are it's going to be for a reason. It could be there's a step there. So there you go.
Okay, great. We have a question from Charlene who asks, are there any code requirements that metal handrails on outside stairs have heat-resistant covering during the hot summer months to prevent burns?
I doubt it. Nothing that I've ever seen, no.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Joel who asks, do all new construction commercial buildings need to meet ADA requirements so that even the non-disabled users have the benefit of the more safe ADA standards?
Commercial, newly constructed or newly, renovated commercial buildings have to be in compliance with ADA, to my knowledge. It depends on certain things. For example, site conditions, topography. There are certain variances that can be granted for non-ADA compliance, depending on site conditions. That's the best way I can answer that question. You have to also realize that state and local governments also have their own accessibility requirements, and that's what they're typically called, is accessibility guidelines or requirements or codes. So to answer your question, yes. But again, it depends on the use of the building, depends on the on certain site conditions. But for the most part, new spaces, new commercial spaces need to be in compliance with accessibility codes.
Okay, great. And this will be our final question from Ken, who asks, what codes would cover the staircases leading up to a commercial trailer, such as would be found on a movie set or at a construction site?
Those would be OSHA. State industrial codes, depending on the state that you're in, and OSHA, federal OSHA. Part 1926 is going to cover construction, and Part 1910 is going to cover general industry. The OSHA website is really very well done. It's easy to navigate, and it's very comprehensive. So you could check that out. State OSHA, some states, I think around 22 states in the country, have chosen to have their own what's called a state OSHA plan. Some of those plans, the jurisdiction is only over state employees, state or government employees. For the private sector, then federal OSHA has jurisdiction over it. It varies state by state. I don't, of course, have all of them memorized, but you want to check into federal OSHA, or if it's a state OSHA plan, and who that covers under that state OSHA plan. And you also want to look at state-specific industrial codes as well.
Okay, now we have the final question. One snuck in while you were answering that question. We have a question here from Gary who asked, are there separate or different code requirements for escalators? If so, where would one find those?
Escalators. Escalators are beyond my area of expertise. What you should do is consult with an elevator specialist, because elevator specialists usually also specialize in escalators. So I don't want to comment on an area that I don't consider myself an expert in. So I apologize about that.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions that we have. So David, would you like to make any concluding remarks?
I think we covered a lot of ground here, and I hope everybody learned something here today, and I hope you had some good takeaways. And that's about it. I thank you all for coming.
Excellent. Well, thanks for putting a very thorough presentation together, David. It shows that you put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think we all appreciate that. If you'd like to speak to David about a specific matter that you're working on, you can contact us here at TASA. Our telephone number is 800-523-2319. As I indicated during the introduction, tomorrow morning I'll send out a link to the archived recording of this program. Contained in that email will be a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that David used during the webinar. The archived recording of this program, as well as all of our previous programs, can be found in the TASA Knowledge Center. If you go to our homepage, tasanet.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll find a link to our webinar series. Our next webinar for legal professionals, Liability Issues with the Management of Special Needs Students, will take place on Thursday, May 2nd, 2013. You'll receive an invitation for that webinar here in the near future. And finally, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me at any time. We do take all of your comments under consideration, and they do help us to put on better programs. And you'll be receiving an email from me at 3:30 today, so you can just respond to that email. With that being said, I will end today's program. Again, thank you, David. Thank you to all the attendees that spent an hour with us, and we'll hope to see you at future TASA programs.
Thank you, Matt.